Thank you very much, Sarah. And yeah, I'm really excited to be kicking off this particular track because the whole track looks awesome. And I'm the figurehead here, but we have a bunch of NumPy developers both in the room and at the conference. Maybe you guys can stick up your hand. Matty and Sebastian there, and we've got Charles Harris and Tyler somewhere else. And then also Travis, who probably most of you know, is sitting right there. All right, so I'll try to give you a picture of how NumPy is doing today. Many of you may know that we received a grant last year, so we now have not just volunteers, but a couple of people who are actually working on NumPy for a living. So give you a sense about how that is working out so far, and then where we see it going next. So I'm guessing most of you know what NumPy is and our users. So I tried to keep this very brief. So NumPy is about 14 years old by now, created in 2005 by Travis. Then NumPy 1.0 was in 2006, and after that it was kind of a slow process. So in the beginning there was one release a year, and after 2010 or so we maybe did 2 releases a year. Then in 2015 we got a little bit more serious about organizing the project, so we instituted a formal governance and formalized our relationship with NumFocus. So we were able to do things like accept money, and that was all in preparation for getting people paid to work on NumPy, because we foresaw that at some point volunteers only would not be enough anymore. So that happened in 2018. So very, very brief history. So the 2 grants, they kind of came as a package deal, totaled $1.3 million. So they ran from April last year to October next year. Stefan, who is also in the room somewhere, I think. Stefan, stick up your hand. So Stefan is one of the co-PIs, together with Fernando Perez, who I don't think is here, but leads also in Jupyter. And those grants really had a dual focus. Obviously there were technical aims, like improve the code, pay down technical debt, make more frequent releases, and bigger technical goals like improve the data type system. But also importantly, some social goals, like improve the community engagement and grow the core team and diversify our, the contributors that we have. So I'll try to give you a sense of, how far we are in achieving those goals. So maybe a little organizational picture of the project helps. So we have, of course, code, websites, repositories, contributors, and core developers. The one formal body we have is a steering council that consists of about 11 members at the moment. And then we have one formal relationship with NumFocus. They're our fiscal sponsor, which means legally we're part of NumFocus. They can do our administration if we need a lawyer. Andy is sitting right there, and NumFocus has a table. They can tell you all about it if you want to know more about fiscal sponsorship. And then we have institutional partners. So basically what that means is those are institutions that employ people part of whose job description it is to work on NumPy. So the main one is Berkeley University with BIT, the Berkeley Institute of Data Science, which employs Stefan and Matty and Sebastian. And then QuantSight, which is the new company that Travis co-founded, and I'm also a part of. So I get part of my time to work on NumPy as well. And then hopefully we kind of grow this structure in the future so that we get more partners and get a broader support for NumPy. So there's 4 key questions I'll try to answer in this talk. One, how has the grant funding, over the last year gone? Has that actually helped NumPy and made it a more active, dynamic project? Now, how healthy and sustainable do we think it is today? And then what do we think it needs in order not to just survive but to thrive? And then what's our vision for the next many years? So the first one, I'll try to do it quantitatively and qualitatively. So first of all, I thought it's really hard to just, you can't just run a script and say like, oh, this is how healthy NumPy is. So I tried a few different methods. The first one, was introduced, well, the first time I saw it was in 2011 by Fernando, who basically ranked the contributors by number of commits. And the idea is basically like, if the curve goes up, you're have a more active project. And if the tail is longer, like it means you have more contributors, which is in general a good thing. Like you don't want to be reliant on one or two people. And you can do a second view of that. It's like normalize it to, the highest contributor being 1, and that gives you a better view of like how heavy is the tail of contributors. And what you see is like the differences aren't huge. So 2018 and 19 are the years where we had 2 funded people working on NumPy. But what you do see is there, from contributor like 3 to 8, 9 or so, they did get substantially more active. So I think we did, from that perspective, broaden the, I would say not the contributor base, but the maintainer base, like people who are, put in like 50 or 100 commits a year, and a lot of that is reviewing other people's code and kind of, hurting the much larger group of contributors to every release. Then, like the question is that, like, how much of that was due to like, volunteers doing more, and how much of that was due to, actually attributable to the grant. So this is a stacked plot where blue is like all the commits by everyone except for the 2 people that we hired to work on NumPy. So the orange bit is the extra we did on top. So I think the story this tells is, if it's numerically, it's about 25% more. I think it did enable us to, to have the focus time to do, to put in a couple of like big things that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. So it made, I think the message I draw out of this is it made a significant difference, but still, 2 full-time people is relatively modest compared to the volunteer effort. And then this is another methodology. I think I had a discussion about this with Nadia Ekbal, who does a lot of research into like, basically how open source projects function. And her thesis was that, the number of open minus closed issues and pull requests says something about the health of a project. So if your issue count keeps on going up, it basically means you can't keep up with, bugs and user requests, etc. So as you see, like there was a big negative spike in the number of issues in 2014, and I think that's when Chuck sat down and went through like 2,000 issues and closed all the ones that that were no longer relevant. But other than that, like the issue rate is like every quarter it goes up by 50 to 70 issues on average, which is basically says we haven't been able to keep up from 2013 on. And only in the last year it dipped negative. So I think that's one of the the big changes that this grant contributed. Like we went from being able to always having an ever increasing count of issues and pull requests to we are now at least keeping up and maybe like catching up on history a little bit. And then so that's quantitative. Now qualitative, it's more like what big things that we achieved that weren't there like a year and 3 months ago when the grant started. So one of the first things that materialized is a roadmap, and that's not a small thing. Like the roadmap basically says like this is the vision for what, or the scope of what NumPy is, and these are the big things that we want to be doing in the next years. And if you've followed NumPy development, getting all the people that have an opinion on the same page is extremely non-trivial. We've also been able to organize some core sprints. So Stefan and the people at Berkeley have done an amazing job in like every couple of months, I think, trying to get people to bids. And there's many of us that have been working on NumPy for maybe almost a decade and had never met in person, and that just makes everything easier to meet each other once or twice. So I think that socially had a big positive impact. Then the NumPy enhancement proposal, it's modeled on the Python enhancement proposal. So we had it for a long time, and basically we had a few documents that said NumPy enhancement proposal, but it wasn't really a thing that we regularly did for big features. And now it is. So I think that means the actual big features for future releases get much more discussion and are much more well thought out. So I think reviving that is also a big achievement. Then we paid down a lot of technical debt. Always a good thing. I won't go into that. And then the NumPy 1.70 release that's coming out is basically the largest release since at least 1.7.0, so in 6 years. And the final thing that's in the works is an Array Developer Summit. And you should ask Stefan about it afterwards if you're interested. But it's basically getting all other Array library developers together to figure out, we have a lot of Array libraries. How do we make them work better together? So first question, has this invigorated the NumPy project? It's yes, we think so, to a certain extent. Faster progress. And personally for me, as a maintainer, I used to always struggle to if something broke, like CI or build, is scrape a few hours together to fix it. So it was really painful. It wasn't fun working on NumPy, and I actually enjoy it more now. And how healthy, sustainable is it? I think it's healthier than a year ago, but if you saw this long-tailed thing, it's still only 4 or 5, certainly not more. On an organizational level, maybe even lower. So I still would not say that NumPy is healthy as a project. I mean, it's better than a year ago, but it's, it needs more help. Then I was going to go on to a few lessons from, having this grant for a year now. And the first one was hiring, which was actually a significant obstacle. And we had a discussion is hiring hard? And it doesn't have to be, but if you're hiring at a university, which is very bureaucratic, and you need people to move to a certain place in the United States at a certain time and work, commit for 2 years, it becomes really hard to hire the right people. So that's one, and the other is who do you hire? So in our experience, I think it works best to hire a mix of people who are already working on our maintainers of a project and then new people. Because if you hire only new people, it takes a lot of time to get them the right input. If you hire only existing people, you might make your sustainability long-term worse, not better. So we hired Matty and Tyler, who's also here. I haven't seen him yet. Last year, and now Tyler is going back to Los Alamos, and now it's Sebastian, who's been a NumPy steering council member for a long time, who just started. So those are 2 people here in the front row at the moment. And then we're having an outreachy applicant named Kriti, who's working on documentation, and we're planning a few more short-term hires. So I think, it was painful, but the hiring is, now sorted out. I think if we hired through NumFocus, for example, it would be a lot more flexible and less painful. So if projects get funding, I think directing it through NumFocus rather than some university is probably a better idea. But if anyone's interested in that, happy to chat after. Then funding. Funding is very complicated. And I think it's already complicated to get funding. But I think what most projects forget is if you get it, you need to figure out what you actually want to pay for, which we didn't do too well at the beginning. We're much better at it now. But just paying for people to write code, is not necessarily the best thing to do. And the other thing is you have to really start, even before you hire people, think about, what's going to happen when the project ends. So one thing, we've been pushing on, for example, is make sure that the regular effort we have to do as a project goes down, not up. So we discussed, for example, benchmarking. Why don't we have a server and make it run benchmarks? A server is maintenance. That's all, stuff you need to do work on to keep running. So as soon as those people disappear, your sustainability problem got worse, not better. So we try to avoid that as much as we can. So here are a few principles I tried to formulate. So first, you pay for things that are important, and also things that don't get done without funding. So if you look at most projects' websites, for example, like they're a disaster because we're not web developers. And that's one thing you really should consider paying for. And then there's also the big technical things that people don't want to do for free. So yeah, there's more to a project than code. I think that's very important. And we're starting to focus on that more right now. Then I think you have to put in some fun stuff as well. Like nobody wants to just fix bugs or just keep the CI system working all year round. So you kind of have to find a balance there. But I think mostly try to to pay for things that people from experience have not want to do for free. Plan for sustainability. I think I covered that. And then you really have to explicitly think about how when you hire people, how that affects volunteer contributors. So if you hire people and start writing lots of code, it means that the volunteers are going to have to review all that code. Right? Most people like to write code more than review code. So if you make all the volunteers review more code, it might just turn them off. I think that's very important. And then who to pay? All else being equal, I think you should consider the people who already contributed for a long time first. Then you have to pay attention to communication, self-management skills. It's always important when you hire someone in a job, but in an open source project, it's way more important than if you hire someone for a company, for example. And then, this is not news, but many of our projects, including NumPy, struggle with diversity. So if you have money, that might be an opportunity to kind of do something about that. So a few challenges I wanted to share. First is maintainer bandwidth. Like I said, we got a little more healthy, but I listed it out. Of the 11 steering council members, we have 3 that are very, very active, that are not paid. We have 3 that are paid to work on NumPy, like Sebastian full-time and Stefan and me for a small part of our time. And then we have 5 that are in low activity mode, which is like for a project with a user base and reach of NumPy is very little, like 6 active core developers. So I think it will remain a challenge for quite a while. We find that it's still hard to get work done on anything that's not code. We're trying to fix it now, but I mean that we started with hiring people that really focused on code, which is was also very necessary. But we now need to fix the things around that. And I think we just need more than 2 people, I think, for that. And then NumPy's culture, I think it is pretty good on average. I don't want to be a too negative message, but I think we still struggle with a lack of diversity. All our major contributors and maintainers are white and male. And it's not as friendly and welcoming as it should be on occasion. But those occasions are sometimes enough to drive someone away. So it's something we just need to keep paying attention to. All right, so now go to the fun part. Where do we see it going from here? First thing is, what is NumPy? Like, if you look at our vision, it's like, at the moment, the scope we have on our website is not very ambitious yet. We have to reformulate that still. But I think the key thing, of course, is the array object and array computing APIs. And one of the things we have been doing and are going to continue doing is kind of separate that API a bit more from executing code to kind of bridge this whole, that there are so many array libraries, because that's starting to become a real problem. Like you write code for NumPy or QPy or TensorFlow or Xarray, and they're all slightly incompatible. So we want to evolve the project, remaining stable. We have a backwards compatibility story we can't easily change. But we have to address these bottlenecks so that all these array libraries can talk better to each other, and that enables the whole ecosystem to grow faster. And then, I try to make clear, NumPy sustainability is important, and we're not there yet. So we need to still work on growing and diversifying our team. So based on what I showed you before, like the 2 people that are little, they had an impact, but it's still small compared to the volunteers, and we're still there's so much stuff to do, and there's whole areas we haven't touched yet, whether it's NumPy distutils or F2Py or high-level documentation. So if we really want to address all of that and add some new features, like 10 full-time people is not at all unreasonable. So that will take a while to get there, but I think that's what we would like. And for that, we also need some more bandwidth from key people to do things like long-term planning and managing the project. And Stuart in his keynote this morning had a great animation and a great story on why that's all necessary. So I'm not going to explain that any further. But then also attracting people in roles that primarily focus on activities other than coding. And this is, I would say our or mine. Like I mostly push this. I think most people kind of had to be convinced, but I think we need to look a little bit broader than NumPy. And you can slice this along different axes, but traditionally, I think if you lump together NumPy, SciPy, pandas, matplotlib, and maybe scikit-learn, that's kind of like a traditional core that almost everyone uses a significant fraction of. The story I just told for NumPy, you can tell for SciPy as well. I can do that because I'm a SciPy developer too, but you can also do this for matplotlib and for pandas. Scikit-learn right now is probably in the best situation, but they have about 4 people working on it full-time if you add a few part-time people together. But even they could use much more. So I think 10 people per project is not unreasonable to kind of, get everything from documentation and websites to big new features that we've wanted for years, and interoperability with like GPU arrays, distributed arrays, all the good stuff. So this is 50 people. Like that's not a small amount of money, right? That's like $7.5 million. And then you have to really carefully think about also how that, how you spend that money to make, to grow your volunteer base rather than erode it. So this picture, like these 50 FTE, like you have to say what these people are going to do, right? You can't just say like we'll hire 50 and everything will be better. You have to get a clear roadmap. It's like what activities are you going to fund from that, and how does this make the whole ecosystem grow? We recently pitched this at NASA because the traditional grant approach doesn't work so well for something that's really infrastructure. Because we're not trying to build many like really new things or new libraries. There the traditional grant approach works better. But here, like saying like we have all this billions of dollars of science and engineering, like whether it's NASA or the NSF or do the same story in Europe, or it's the big tech companies. They all rely on this. Express our needs clearly and then go to the likes of NASA, which is like a trial. But they were very responsive to this story. And then saying like, your next telescopes and missions are going to rely on this. Why don't you help, pay for 10% of this? Which is a very, like, that's a small amount of change for them. I'm very interested in building out this effort and really publicly expressing, what we need to do with that amount of funding and people. So that's a conversation I hope to have with many of you over the next couple of days. But yeah, hopefully from there we can grow both NumPy and the rest of the ecosystem. Thank you.
Any questions for Ralph?
Just wondering if you can talk briefly about the visions that the difficulty of making a roadmap. It sounds like that's a really hard thing to do in a sort of an open source community.
Yes, so it's hard to do for, well, 2 main reasons come to mind immediately. One is you need to have, the 1 or 2 people that, heard everybody else to even have the discussion. And that's a major effort. Like, people don't like to do these kind of things. It feels like, management they should be reserving for a day job. And the other part is like we have very diverse user base. We have, people that, that are, maybe in deep learning or, libraries like Dask who are really, proactive. They move fast. They don't mind breaking backwards compatibility so much because they want to do the next thing that doesn't work yet. But then you have the scientific users that complain about the little thing you changed and deprecated, like because their code from 10 years ago worked on it. So I think that was particularly for NumPy, like a really, it's a tension that you can't really resolve. So that's part of why we work on this interoperability. So if you separate the API from the execution, that story becomes a lot easier.
So you mentioned the need to sort of further develop the documentation. And so I'm wondering who are the intended audiences for that documentation, or perhaps the priority audiences for that documentation? And then what are the big challenges for writing documentation for such an audience?
I think at the moment, like, we have really good reference documentation. That's all auto-generated from doc strings. We have, like, our website, if you go to numpy.org, like, it's really embarrassing. There's nothing there. So it's like, if you're a newcomer to NumPy or to the ecosystem, like, there's really nowhere to point a new user to. So that's the single biggest gap. And then the high-level narrative documentation is also really hard to write. Even for, like, hey, I want to write an array-like library. So should I use subclassing or whatever? Like, these things we don't express. Like, we have some kind of shared understanding because we talk to each other on GitHub all the time. But I think it's the high-level documentation, beginning users first, but also for other library authors, people who write things that depend on NumPy. I think there's more gaps than actual content at the moment.
So in your presentation and like discussion of this, you talk a lot about maintainers and people contributing code, and you say that there's more people beyond the code, but you never use like the manager word or like administrator word. And then just like as somebody in industry, I just look at this, I'm like, well, that's cute. I mean, like, who's going to actually make sure all this work gets done and help this team prioritize, and how does that go into your vision for this great new ecosystem you're building?
That's a very good question. I think if you ask me who's actually managing, like, Stefan is is on paper the co-PI, but he's actually the one that's doing the managing at Berkeley. I'm probably the one that's doing most of the managing in the project. It tends to be a word we don't like as a community. But yes, I think if you talk to a funder, like, that's a word they expect, and it might make sense to explicitly incorporate such roles in the governance structure. But you're right that there our bus factor is way smaller. It's 2 at the most. Yes.
Hey, so you highlighted the value of money essentially towards addressing diversity and inclusion problems. I'm just wondering if you have any slightly more concrete suggestions, especially for, say, groups that have smaller amounts of funds than 5 FTEs and want to know what they could potentially do that's just like one actionable item that they can throw money at.
Yes.
Or you can use money for that problem.
Yeah, I have. This is the first year you may know that Google is running Google Season of Docs, and I spend a lot of effort in like interacting with applicants to that, and it's been a really good experience. So we have a lot of very high quality applicants. They're also like tech writers. Senior tech writers are not as expensive as senior software engineers. So with less money goes a lot further. And in general, I think these kinds of roles, tech writer is the first one that comes to mind, but there are other roles that help a project diversify. I think both in roles, but it comes also with a different demographic.
Wonderful.
What role do funders have in influencing roadmaps?
Very little. So first of all, like in the organizational picture I showed you, like there is no direct relation between the funder and the project. That really should change. But also, it should be the other way around. Like the community, you know, together. Like ideally, we would also have things like user surveys. You know, which is another one of those things like you would really like. No one likes to do that and organize that for free. But we need to gather as much input from major users and, you know, what we see in our, you know, day-to-day, like what the questions people come with and the bugs they file. But it really should be a community-driven effort to build a roadmap, and then you can go out to funders and say, like, hey, this is what, you know, this whole community that also, you know, you're the funder for cares about. And I think there may be exceptions, like there may be especially companies that just need a feature and need to pay someone. You know, it would make sense to kind of have that, like a roadmap process for that. But in general, I think it's a, you know, from us, have a roadmap that makes sense for the project and the community as a whole, and then go to funders.
Thank you, Ralph.